Yo, how's it going everybody? It's Sketch and welcome back to the channel. Now in today's episode we're taking a look at a classic in survival horror, the original Resident Evil, developed and published by Capcom in 1996 for the original PlayStation. The version we're looking at today is the Director's Cut DualShock Edition, which released in September of 1998. This initially released as a response to the delay of Resident Evil 2, while also shipping with a rearranged mode which would make several gameplay changes to further challenge those who'd already mastered the original at this point. Let's enter the world of survival horror and check out the story of how this saga began. In the year 1998, a series of strange murders happened in the midwestern town of Raccoon City, where victims had appeared to be eaten. STAR's Alpha Team is dispatched to investigate the occurrences to only disappear without much trace. Bravo Team then heads in to make contact with their missing team, only to be attacked upon landing, seeking refuge in the Spencer Mansion up the way. You drop in as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine and attempt to regroup with your squad, while unraveling the mysteries contained within not only the mansion, but also your colleagues. Gameplay-wise, we're thrown into a fully 3D rendered environment with some pre-rendered backgrounds that will become standard practice for the games of the genre moving forward, along with an introduction for most to tank controls. Other series had a similar style prior to this, but the main one it draws comparison to would be the original Alone in the Dark games. The main thing here is to make your way through the Spencer Mansion while not succumbing to the numerous perils and enemies contained within the facility. Even from the very first encounter where you see your first zombie, the intensity will only dial up from there. The mansion functions as a hub leading to the other areas of the grounds, of which there are 4 total seen in this entry. There's a lot of traps and enemies to deal with, along with a fair amount of puzzles, hidden items, and weapons to make the journey a little less cumbersome. The puzzles seen here for the most part aren't too difficult, but sometimes filling in the pieces will come from boss encounters or nearly getting smoked by traps, which depending on character chosen, can be met with some at times gruesome results or very close escapes. Whilst the later entries and remakes would adopt a more free-roaming approach to the camera over time, in the originals all the angles are fixed, limiting viewpoints to the player as to not know what may be around that next corner, good or bad. The original entry and the director's cut don't vary too much here in that regard, but there are some rooms and areas that do switch perspectives up in a couple different ways. The camera system in here is one of those things that people either love or hate, but all things considered, this series was the one to popularize static camera angles in survival horror, and even going back time and time again, it can be appreciated given the scope of what they were going for, creating an unsettling atmosphere just based on appearances. Here is one of many games where how you want to play it is mostly up to you as far as going for more combat driven scenarios or conserving as much as you can until it's needed, while doing your best to avoid the threats around you. Inventory management is also a key factor here, considering if your stock is full, you can't carry any more unless you drop items off in a chest and come back for it. Combat centers around readying your weapon before firing or using it. This makes for different results in action, considering aiming low or mid-range may slow your opponent down, but aiming higher in many instances will flat out behead several enemies in one shot. Best suggestion, if you're gonna fight it, don't stop until you see the puddle or take its head off.
Break yourself, fool!
The director's cut compared to the original offers 2 additional settings, being its arranged mode, which switches up combat scenarios and item locations for those that have the original game dialed in, as well as a beginner mode where players get an honestly absurd amount of ammo and ink ribbons for saving game progress, along with the original mode seen from its 1996 release. Whichever you choose will present a challenge alongside 8 possible endings to unlock. Graphics wise, Resident Evil was programmed with the Silicon graphics hardware, utilizing software by Soft Image. This is one of the prime examples of 3D based games in pre-rendered environments in the mid-90s. Resident Evil 1 also featured some full motion video segments in the game's opening splash sequence, along with its infamous opening cutscene, which is still censored like its original version. The opening cutscene is still pretty amusing after all these years, and it's truly interesting knowing just how much of the original game was cut for the US release, which was later made available by going to its website to view the uncensored content. This too was one of those games, especially at the time, looked like nothing else that was available at the moment with its polygon sprites over pre-rendered environments. The animation scene here, especially with zombie headshot animations, was pretty mind-blowing back then. The design of areas in general also have this desolate yet lived-in feel, and the things you uncover throughout the mission are quite interesting. The locations vary more than you would initially expect at a glance, and there's some really good effects work seen over the course of the game. One of the interesting things about this and the first few sequels was the door animations between sections. Moving through doors was a neat way to conceal the load times between rooms and creating a seamless experience, while also giving the illusion that there were no load times in the entirety of the game. This trick would also be later used to mess with players and having threats burst through random doors, sending you back the way you came or initiating an unexpected encounter. Resident Evil 1 was not shy with some of the gore effects or death animations either, and this too was one of the things that made it stick out, especially with its adverts and previews. It just looks sick, especially when outside of PC games, nothing on console looked quite like this yet. It was essentially an Italian horror movie you could play through, considering its influences is still quite the experience even now. The sheer amount of death animations for you and your enemies is actually pretty impressive. Enemy designs were also pretty sick with a variety of large and small abominations, with the zombies being the main threat you'll face. As the game goes on, you'll have numerous run-ins with zombie dogs, giant spiders, gigantic snakes that can legit eat you in one gulp, and hunters. The reveal of the hunters was one of those things back in the day that was pretty frightening, considering this enemy has higher health stats and can swipe your head clean off with only a couple hits. Plant 42 is also a pretty wild encounter, which I didn't know until recently could go a few different ways. If done properly, you'll mix down a serum to spread on its roots, making it much easier to kill. But if you go into the room before doing so, the door will lock behind you and your weapons will do next to no damage. Luckily, Barry can burst in once again to save you if you're playing as Jill. Sound-wise is also one of the main points of contention, being the voice acting. If you're into B-horror movies, this type of dialogue and delivery is going to be par for the course. The voice acting, while maybe not the most heartfelt performances ever, falls into the so bad it's good category, at least for me. Playing this back in the day and playing this time and time again, those lines are ingrained in memory, as I'd imagine it is for most anyone else who's played it also. Resident Evil 2 and beyond would definitely step up their voice acting substantially, but this honestly isn't that bad. Aside from that, the rest of the audio is pretty sick, with tons of effects work from opening various doors to the sounds of various enemies audibly cueing you for what may be in the room with you. The toe taps of the hunters to the caw of the crows all give you an idea as to what threats are around you, especially if you ran past them the first time. Weapon sounds are also pretty nice here, especially the shotgun and grenade launcher. The Magnum also straight up sounds like a thunderclap and does about as much damage, so grab this in-game if you find the corresponding jewel and the revolving tiger statue. The music on Resident Evil 1's original soundtrack is also pretty dope, with some spooky atmospheric tunes along with more dramatic tracks for the more intense encounters. The Director's Cut DualShock Edition actually changes just about every tune in the game and replaces them by compositions from composer Mamoru Samaroguchi, which have a more orchestral feel to them. I'll admit I like the original soundtrack a lot more than this one, but both serve their purpose really at the end of the day. Overall, Resident Evil is one of those games that ever since playing it decades ago, absolutely stuck with me and ignited a franchise that will become world-renowned with its lengthy catalog of mainline games and spin-offs. This was an experience that many would often remember just for the opening sections of the game, and to those who would clear it often callbacks, quotes, and scenes of this epic and survival horror. The sequels would add new elements upon each entry and often raise the bar with terrifying experiences and beyond solid gameplay. The series has its moment where it falters some, but the originals is a great place to start with the saga, along with its remake for the GameCube and modern consoles. Resident Evil gets an 8.5 out of 10 and is highly recommended for horror game fans as well as fans of 3D adventure games of the era, since for a long time this was the benchmark for survival horror. While this game isn't perfect, for a first attempt it gets pretty close. The sequels would perfect the template set here, and with each installment they up the ante tenfold. The later sequels, especially the first 3 canon entries, are all very much worth playing through as well. The PlayStation got 3 versions of Resident Evil 1 alone, along with the Sega Saturn, as well as the remake for the GameCube, which are all pretty stellar games. If you're into horror games, majority of the Resident Evil series entries are bangers, and these are fun ones to play through in chronological order or as standalones. And I thank you again for checking out this video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use it as a resource. Check back often. We'll have more reviews and commentaries coming up in the near future. But until then, take it easy, stay safe out there, and I'll see you on the next one.